Hey y'all, and welcome back to the character creation course. I'm Sir Pinkbeard, and in this video I'm going to be showing you guys how to create the UVs for our character. Now, there are a couple of things before we get started. The first is that all of these objects have a mirror modifier attached to it, and while that made creating each of these objects super simple, it does mean that our textures will be symmetrical for each of our objects. So if you don't want your textures to be symmetrical on the left and the right, make sure you apply that mirror modifier before you start UVing. The only object that we're going to do that with for this character is the head. Secondly, we will not be working with the hair in this video. We will come back to the hair before we get into rigging. It will have its own separate video. And finally, while we will be unwrapping everything individually, we will combine all of their UVs at the end so that they all share a 0 to 1 texture space. Now, Blender 2.9 does have the ability to create UDIM textures, but since you can't bake UDIM textures natively, we're going to just stick with a single 0 to 1 texture space. All of that said, let's get started. So let's go ahead and start with the head. Now, before we can actually unwrap this, we do need to clean up a little bit of stuff around the eyes. So let's grab the head and go into the modeling workspace, and let's go ahead and just preemptively hide the shirt because that's going to get in the way when we start unwrapping. Now, what we can see if we also hide the eyes is that, well, you can see through the eye socket, and that's not what we want at all. So go ahead and just grab this little eye loop here. Hit E to extrude, Y to lock it to the Y axis, and then bring it back just a little bit. And then we can go ahead, turn off proportional editing if you had that on from previously in the series, and then we'll scale this down. From here, go to face, and then grid fill. Now we don't need that many faces in this section, so let's bring that down to 2, and then make this offset go until the line connects horizontally like that. Okay, and then just to continue the illusion of an actual eyelid, let's go ahead and add in a loop cut here and scale this up. All right, and with that done, that's going to give the illusion of real eyelids, so that way when we add in the eyes again, not only can we not see through, but it also looks like we do have an actual bit of an eyelid there. Okay, so with the eyes adjusted, and you can spend a little bit more time on that if you want to, it's time to actually unwrap our head. So let's go over to the UV editing workspace, select everything, and then hit U and unwrap. Now, if you don't have live unwrap turned on, you're going to want to turn it on. Also, because this model we want to have a slightly different texture on the left and the right, maybe we want to add a scar or something like that, let's go ahead and apply our mirror modifier. So now when we hit tab, we have mesh all the way around, and then we'll hit U and unwrap again. So from here, let's turn on stretching, go to display, stretching, and then turn it to area stretching, and we can see all of different colors. Now we want to try to get each of these faces as blue as possible. So to do that, we're just going to add in a couple of seams here. When unwrapping a head, we generally take a line going from the bottom of the chin to the base of the neck, and from right about the top of the brow all the way back around the head. So let's just go ahead and do that. We'll start by control selecting from the bottom of the chin. In fact, we'll even get rid of that one that we just picked. Reset the view to make it easier to rotate around our object, and then right click and mark seam. And immediately, because we have that live unwrap turned on, we can see our UV map update. Okay, and then let's do the same thing with the top of the brow. We'll go all the way around the back of the head here and mark seam. And now we can see the head is pretty much unwrapped. And if we zoom in, we only have a red area around the inside of the mouth here, and that is caused by the mouth bag. So let's go ahead and grab an edge loop on the inside. So just Alt select on the inside there and mark a seam. Now we can see that that red is gone, but we just want to finish out this mouth bag even though no one's really going to see it. We'll just remove the stretching by going down the center line and hitting mark seam again. Now at this point, our head is basically good to go. We have some ear detail that could be cleaned up if we were to pull off the ear in its own, but let's go ahead and do that and see if it's worth it. So we'll just right click and pull seam. And you know what? It got rid of the yellow. So to me, it's worth it. So then let's go and select mirror selection, and then right click and mark seam again to get both ears. At this point, our head is completely unwrapped. We could get a little bit more around the nose, but honestly, how much nose detail do you really put into a model? When you're texturing, if you notice, there's not a ton. They generally just seem to be the same color as the rest of the skin. So this is good. All right, and now with the head done, we can move on to another object. So, since we're in the vicinity of the head anyway, let's just go ahead and unwrap the eyes next. So select the eyes, go back to modeling workspace, and we can see that it sets up the UVs automatically like that, but that's not a great UV unwrap for an eye. So let's go ahead and rotate the eye 90 degrees on the x-axis, and then we can see that the top of the sphere is now going to act as a sort of pupil placement, and we'll go ahead and hide the head, and then just add in a single seam down the center of the sphere here, just by doing loop select, which is alt select, and then right clicking and adding in a seam. Alright, so with the eye unwrapped, let's move on down to the shirt. Now, if we select an edge here, we can get the edge, but I think there's some extra thickness here. So let's just go ahead and select everything, and then go up to mesh, clean up, and then merge by distance. And that got rid of 237 vertices for us. And that would have really caused a problem if we had left those vertices in there on the shirt when we went to create our UVs. But you can see we're getting some weirdness with the actual shirt faces itself. So we can check the auto smoothing, and we can see that it is auto smoothing, and it's set to 84 degrees of auto smoothing. So I don't think that's the problem. In fact, I think the problem might actually have to do with the face orientation. So let's come up here to the top and turn on face orientation and just check that out. Yep, that does appear to be the case. So just go into edit mode, select everything, shift in, and that will recalculate the normals for us so that now our smoothing is applied evenly across the faces of the shirt. And then we can turn off face orientation and get back to unwrapping our shirt. And we'll just hide the head, and then with the shirt you want to treat it like a normal shirt. So we're going to add in a seam here where the sleeve would meet the rest of the shirt, and then we can add a seam up at the top. So just select one of the edges, and then what we'll do is we'll turn on X-ray to be able to select the edges inside, and then just right click and mark that as a seam, and we can see that the front and back of the shirts are now modeled together. And then we need to unwrap the shirt sleeve. So let's just alt select on the edge here, and then right click and mark that as a seam. And that will not only unwrap the bottom of the shirt for us, but it'll also unwrap the sleeve to basically the cuff, but we have to finish that out manually. So let's just grab those last three edges and also add that. Okay, and now let's go ahead and add a seam around the cuff of the shirt. And we still have some weirdness going in on the inside because of the solidify modifier that we applied for our shirt. So let's just grab some of those edges around where the inside connects, mark those as a seam, and then unwrap the cuff by simply selecting one of the edges. Okay, and for the last part, now all we have to do is the collar. Collar is going to be super easy, so just select all of the edges on the inside of the shirt collar there. Add those as a seam. And then we want to select the bottom edge of the shirt collar, just so we can separate out the rectangle that is the shirt collar. And we can see there's still a little bit of red here on the back of the shirt collar. So what we need to do is just select that final edge on the back of the shirt collar there. So we'll grab those two edges and mark those as seams, and now our shirt is completely unwrapped. But you know what? I want to combine those front and backs again, so let's just grab those edges that we had selected previously and clear the seams on that. Now with the shirt done, let's move on down to the hands, and we can go ahead and just hide the shirt and then reset our view with numpad period so that it makes it a little easier to move around. Now here's the thing with hands, when you unwrap them, you just are basically pulling apart the top of the hand and the bottom of the hand. So pick an edge that runs along the side of the hand and mark that as a seam, and then just continue that seam all the way around the fingers. So just alt selecting on the edge loops, and hopefully if you have done your retopology correctly, your edge loops will line up, and then just take those all the way to the base of the wrist again. Okay, and now you can see over on the left hand side that we have our UVs, but they're not perfect. We can actually see that 2 of the fingers are overlapping on the right UV island there. So we just need to figure out where that needs to be fixed, and it looks like when I was doing some retopology, I messed up on the edge loops. So I'm just going to remove these seams here because you don't put a ton of detail in the hands, and I don't particularly care if the detail isn't, 100% perfect, because like I said, you're not really going to see that detail. If I was a smarter man, or maybe if I had planned it better or noticed it when I was retopping, I could have fixed those edge loops. So I'll just change the seam on that a little bit. And now I've got 2 solid UV islands for the hands. Okay, now that we've unwrapped the hands, it's time to do the belt and the pants. I'm going to start with the pants just because it's going to be the easiest here. And we're just going to right click and add a seam around the top. Select everything, hit U and unwrap though. And we can see that we've still got a bunch of red everywhere. So just like pants have an in seam and an out seam, we're going to do the same thing. So we'll mark the seam and then we'll grab the outside and mark the seam. And there we go. Now this is connected by the base face there, so let's go ahead and hide these boots. We can go ahead and actually let's delete this face, grab these edge loops and see if we can get a grid fill in here. We can. There we go, and we'll mark that as a seam all the way around. All right, and the pants are basically done. The only issue that we might have, where is that? It's right there on the base. No one's gonna see that. So yeah, pants are good. So moving on from the pants, let's unwrap the belt. Now the belt's going to be pretty simple. After all, it's basically just a rectangle. So select the bottom edge loop going all the way around and just right click and mark it as a seam. And then do the same thing for the attached leather piece. And then once we've marked the seams there, what we're going to do is just pull off the piece that's hanging down just by selecting all of the edges going around that section and marking those as seams. The final thing will be to pull off this extra little section of leather here. So just mark seams pulling off the entire leather section here, the top, bottom, and the sides where they connect to the belt. And then we just want to select the edge rings going around the side there to get that final piece undone. And now let's come over and work on the belt loop. It's just a rectangle pretty much, so you're just pulling it off from the belt and then unwrapping it so that it lays flat. All right, and that looks good enough for our belt. Alright, so with the belt done, let's get on down to the boots. Now the boots, just like the shirt, also had a solidify modifier on them. So what we can do here is just go back to object mode and apply that solidify modifier. And from there, we can check out the face orientation to make sure everything is good. And just like the shirt, we do have some weirdness going on with the face orientations. So what we'll do is just select all of these vaguely red faces and then hit Shift N, and then go to the operator panel at the bottom and check the inside button, which will flip those faces to point them outside. Now, while we were able to flip most of the faces, some of the faces that were interacting with the solidify modifier are not the right color. So let's just clean those up again by going to Mesh, Clean Up, and then Merge by Distance. And we can see that we cleaned up over 3,000 vertices, which is a ton. And actually, we should have known that there were some duplicate faces there when we had started selecting the faces and realized that they weren't this bright red. They were a bit of a purple-ish red, if you will. That's a clear sign that the faces are stacked on top of each other. And also, we need to do some face cleanup for the shoelace, just because, we don't need this many faces here. So let me just clean these up real quick, and then we'll start with the seams. Now that I've cleaned up the shoelaces, let's add some seams. And when you're applying your seams, you want to think about shoes in general. So there will be a seam where the sole meets the leather of the shoe, and then there'll be a seam where the leather of the back of the shoe meets the bottom of the boot. And then we need to apply some seams to the top and inside of the solidified sections, so that way our map can get pulled off a little bit. Now the odds of being able to see the texture on these little sections of the boots are very small, especially if you're, planning to keep the camera out of that range, but there is the possibility that a character might be seen in that way, so we want to make sure that we're accurately pulling those sections. Now at this point, I'm trying to mark some seams going on the inside of the boot, but what I'm realizing is that some of our solidified sections and these faces that will never be seen are causing some really weird issues with our UVs. So since they're never going to be seen, I'm going to remove them. But if you have the same situation, just be careful that you're only removing faces that will never be seen. You don't want to accidentally remove some faces and then have to try to put it back in. And you can see we still have some red sections because of these solidified areas, but all we got to do is find exactly where to place the seam, which is actually at the very bottom corner of these faces. And with that final seam placed, the boots are unwrapped as we needed them to be. So now that we've finished unwrapping most of the large objects, it's time to finish off with the small objects, the top teeth, the bottom teeth, and the tongue. Now the tongue we really won't have to unwrap because that's just got some modifiers on it and it's just a plane at the moment. So we're really just going to focus on the teeth. Now, the gums, we don't really have to do anything to unwrap, but the teeth themselves are just little rectangles. So what we want to do is essentially grab each of the 4 corner edges, then right-click in the 3D viewport and mark as a seam. And then just repeat that for every single tooth. Alright, and since when we created the teeth, all we did was basically mirror the teeth, so they're essentially the exact same with some size adjustments, the process for unwrapping the top teeth is the same as the bottom teeth, and since I've already shown it to you once, I'm not going to show it twice. So now that everything has been unwrapped individually, let's combine each of their individual UVs into a single 0 to 1 texture space. So with everything selected, click over into the UV editing workspace. Then just hit A to make sure that we have everything selected, and then U and unwrap. Now, if you wanted to take this texture out and do it in Photoshop, or if you really like getting super clean UVs, you can arrange these. But for me, all I need to worry about for this character is that we increase the margin here just to 0.003. So just click in that box there and type in 0.003, hit enter, and you'll be good to go. Alright, and so we don't need any further adjustments for our UVs, so now we are ready for texturing. So now that our UVs are created, it is time to get into texturing. But since this video is long enough, I will see you guys in the next video where we talk about how to bake textures and hand paint the textures after we bake them. I'm Sir Pinkbeard, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.